Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Crystal McCauley. I'm honored to be here as the Community Director for Mom Congress. We are offering another bill training today in our series for the 2023 Mom Congress Moms Agenda. Today, we're going to be learning about the Improving Childcare for Working Families Act of 2023. We are honored to be joined by Whitney Pesic of the National Women's Law Institute again. So you might have been here with us last week. Whitney did the training for us on expanding childcare in rural America, and she is back with us today to train on this bill. So thank you so much, Whitney, and I'll ask you to do another intro and a little backgrounder for us if you don't mind when we turn it over to you. And Ebony, we can go to the next slide and we will do our little bit of homework here. We'd like for each of you to look up HR 1421. I'm going to put a link for that in the chat while Ebony opens it up now. This is the official record for everyone who is currently signed on to this bill in the House. And so you can see here, when you click on that link, go over to the co-sponsors tab. There's a list of 12 there so far. And go ahead and see if your House of Representatives member is already on that list. And then we can go back to the slides. There is not a Senate version, so this bill is not bicameral at this time. It is only in the House. And then I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Whitney, to give us our training today. Thanks so much for being here again.
Thank you, Crystal, and thank you to all of you who are on the call today. I see I have some of my neighbors in Virginia. I live in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. So seeing folks in Fairfax and Richmond, it's good to see you. As Crystal mentioned, my name is Whitney Pesic. I'm the Director of Federal Child Care Policy at the National Women's Law Center. I don't have any kids of my own, but I am a second-generation childcare provider. So this issue is very near and dear to my heart. And before I jump into my presentation, I'm going to tell folks a little bit about the National Women's Law Center. The National Women's Law Center fights for gender justice in the courts, in public policy, and in our society, working across the issues that are central to the lives of women and girls. We use the law in all its forms to change culture and drive solutions to the gender inequity that shapes our society, and to break down the barriers that harm all of us, especially women of color, LGBTQ+ people, and low-income women and families. For 50 years, we have been on the leading edge of every major legal and policy victory for women. Okay. So the Improving Childcare for Working Families Act. So this bill has been introduced in previous Congresses, and what it does is it increases the amount that families can put aside to pay for childcare. It's called the Dependent Care Assistance Program. It's similar to what folks may be a little bit more familiar with, like a health savings account, which is money that you can put aside ahead of paying your taxes towards healthcare. Well, this is similar, except it's for childcare. But the interesting part of this bill is that since DCAP, or the Dependent Care Assistance Program, was started in 1981, it's only been increased up to $5,000 in 1986 and has not moved since. And as I'm sure many of you on this call know, that childcare expenses often exceed well over $5,000 a year. And so as the price of childcare has gone up, Congress has not increased the amount of money that families can set aside pre-tax to pay for childcare. And so this legislation, as Crystal mentioned, is bipartisan. There are Democrats and Republicans on this legislation that would increase the amount of money that families can set aside to pay for childcare. Again, I'm sure you all know childcare prices have been absolutely skyrocketing. They exceed annual inflation and have exceeded the increases in things such as like groceries and rent that may take up more time in the media, but actually the prices of childcare have far exceeded that. And it is projected that if nothing changes, childcare prices are going to continue to rise by as much as 14% by 2025. And this obviously disproportionately impacts women because, as we know in our society, caregiving, generally falls on the woman in heterosexual relationships. And so anytime that there's, an issue with childcare, it disproportionately impacts women. And so anything that the federal government can do to make childcare more affordable, more accessible for families will really have a great impact on women. And that's why this legislation is really important because it can help some women access and afford childcare and do it in a way that saves them money on their taxes. And so this legislation is pretty simple. I mean, it literally is just changing the amount of money that families can put aside from $5,000 to over doubling it to $10,500. So instead of putting aside $5,000, families would be able to, under this new legislation, set aside up to $10,500 per year in pre-tax money to go towards childcare expenses. And there's currently only 12 co-sponsors, so many of you will be able to ask your House member of Congress to co-sponsor this legislation and push it forward. I'll also just note that there is a possibility of tax legislation moving in the next year or couple of years. There's some movement on the House side to want to do some tax legislation, as well as the 2017 some of those tax provisions in the large bill that passed under the Trump administration are going to start expiring in 2025. So taxes are going to be top of mind for your members of Congress. And this is a way for them to signal that they are paying attention to their constituents and their concerns around affording and accessing childcare, whether they are families that need childcare to get to work, businesses that need childcare so their employees can show up to work, that this is a way for your member to signal that they understand the enormous pressure that families are under when they cannot afford and access childcare. And this would show that they're listening and that they're trying to do what they can do in a time when it's really difficult to pass a lot of legislation because the Senate is controlled by Democrats and the House is controlled by Republicans. That this is something that isn't going to cost the federal government a lot of money. And is directly tied to someone's work. So, the person's working and alleviate some of the concerns that members of Congress sometimes have with some other childcare legislation that has been proposed. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Like I said, it's a pretty simple bill. It's literally about doubling, a little over doubling the amount of money that folks can set aside, but happy to chat more about anything that would be useful.
Thanks so much, Whitney. That's a great overview. And yes, while simple, you and I and Ebony have discovered in our conversations that there's lots of room to chat about the bill. If you have questions or thoughts, concerns, we would love to address those now. So please feel free to unmute or use the chat function if you're on live and you have questions about the bill. We have a couple more people who are jumping in from the waiting room. So I'll just say out loud that one of the concerns we had internally was a discussion about who can access $10,000 for childcare. And that is, that's setting aside your own earnings to, since it's attached to your income, to set aside for childcare. And I think the important thing that we noted was that there's a lot of working families who need that increase. And so even though it's not a broad brush stroke to impact every single family in the United States, it's one lane that we can be in addition to the Expanding Childcare in Rural America Act. Whitney, you had a really great point earlier when we were chatting about like the several things that it doesn't address. We recognize what it does. We said it does not address wages. And what was the other component you were thinking of?
Building the supply, that over half of U.S. counties actually are what are called childcare deserts, meaning there is not enough licensed childcare for the amount of families that are seeking childcare slots. And so by, allowing folks to set aside money to pay for childcare isn't going to help folks who don't have childcare in their community or have wait lists that are months and years long. So yeah, Crystal, those were the 2 points, is that, and it doesn't address the recruitment and retention and staffing problems at childcare programs.
Really fantastic. But I do love what you already brought up, Whitney, that it opens the door, right? It opens the door for us to say, we need to talk about childcare. This is a very small thing that you, as our House of Representatives member, can do for our community. You can bring up the statistics for what childcare costs for you personally or for other parents in your region. We've got a great question here in the chat. Kelly asked, how was the amount of $10,500 determined?
That's a really good question, and I don't know. I'm happy to do some homework if that's useful information. I'm happy to ask folks that have worked a little closer on this legislation to figure out if that's tied to, you know, an average cost, or maybe there's another tax credit. I'll admit taxes are not my specialty. Maybe it mirrors another tax credit. I'm really not sure, but I'm happy to figure that out if it's helpful.
Thanks so much. Becky, you have a question as well?
Yes. So the quick question is this in any way kind of related to tax credits that we would get at the end of the year related to childcare? Are they connected in any way? Because I know that amount is like, I know that was around like $5,000 tax credit. So is that connected in any way, or is it completely different?
No, that's a really good question. And it gets really confusing because there are a lot of tax credits that have child and care in them. So the child tax credit, the CTC that was expanded during the pandemic, that was just money that was given to families, and you didn't have to have a taxable income in order to be able to have that money. It's and this is different from that. So this is not $5,000 that you can access. It's $5,000 of your own money that you put into the special savings account. So that way you're not paying taxes on it, but that's really your only savings. It's not at all additional money in your pocket like the child tax credit was. So it is different. But I think, you know, there's a lot of even members of Congress and their staff who don't totally like, they'll call the CTC the child tax credit, the child care tax credit, or they'll call the child independent care tax credit, the CDCTC. You know, it's very interchangeable. It gets very confusing, but this is different. It's more like a savings account than having to do with taxes. If I'm explaining that well, please ask follow-up questions if I'm not.
No, you explained it well, Whitney. And I'll say this, the one thing that is to note here is that your employer has to enroll in the opportunity for you to access these funds. So Whitney mentioned HSA funds earlier, health savings account funds. So if you work for an employer who offers you the opportunity for one of these accounts, there's either the health savings account fund or there's this child care fund. If your employer opts into this, so you have to have the employer that has the ability to do that. So once they opt in, then you can go in as the employee and declare, I would like to set aside at this point up to $5,000. And so each of your paychecks will have a little bit of a doc out to accumulate that $5,000, and then you submit the receipts, generally depending on which company's managing your savings account, to where they pay you back. And what you're saving there is the tax money. So instead of that money going into your paycheck being taxed and then you pay it to the provider, this money gets squirreled away before you even get your paycheck. And then when you pay the child care provider, this savings fund reimburses you of money that you've already saved. You just didn't have to pay taxes on it.
Thank you, Crystal. That was really helpful, the way that you spelled that out. I really appreciate that. And also that is such an important point, that that the employer has to set up this program. So not necessarily, you know, even some families who do have the money to put away if their employer doesn't, facilitate this program, they can't participate. So thank you so much for mentioning that's really important.
You're quite welcome. It occurred to me that, so this is, we are narrow in that way, where this is really touching on families who are working for an employer who have opted in for the childcare savings account fund. So this is a good conversation for us to have outside of just, advocating with our legislator, is how do we make these programs more accessible? You ask them to increase the money, and then what can we do to make it accessible to more people? So again, it opens that door to continue the conversation about affordable childcare. And this is pretty laser focused on working families, and specifically ones who are working for an employer who can access these funds too. So fantastic. Oh, thanks, Natasha. That's greatly appreciated. Are there any other questions for our live participants today? Any points of clarification you'd like?
I have a question.
Yes, please go right ahead. Hi, Desiree.
Hi. So for those that, like, I know at my husband's job, they do have that for us. But are there stipulations for families beforehand? Like you both need to work this many hours, or it needs to have, are there qualifications within, just having your employer have it, are there qualifications as well to receive or to be able to use the program?
That's a really good question. No, as long as, your husband, or I'm using you as an example, but, as long as you follow your company's program, whether that be like, turning in receipts or getting it authorized ahead of time, the money is, it's your money. So there is no, like, you have to prove you're working a certain amount of hours a week, or that, both parents are out of the house working. It really is just, a savings account that's administered by your employer. And other than that, there's no other stipulations.
Thanks so much. That's a really great question, Desiree. I think it's really up to the employer. If they have the funding, if they have the option for the funding and you choose to opt into it, then you can take it without other stipulations. Go ahead, Becky, you have another question.
Yeah, sorry guys. So the other question I have then is, what about people who are self-employed business owners? How would you access this type of program? Because my husband and I own our own business, and so we do everything as self-employed. So how do you access this?
So I think that is, another limitation of this proposal, is that it really does benefit mostly larger employers that have the, human resources department and administrative and finance staff in order to administer a program of this size. Again, I'm so sorry, I'm not a tax expert. I'm not sure how employers set up, health savings accounts or these DCAP accounts. Again, I'm happy to do some research for you if that's helpful. But it really is, I think that, from my perspective, one of the, not one of the reasons why this isn't the the silver bullet for our childcare system, because it isn't going to reach everyone. It is just for, like Crystal said, that really narrow set. I'm not sure if, as a owner of a small business or self-employed, if there's a way for you to set up the program yourself, but I would guess not, since this does seem to be mostly offered by larger employers, because I think there is a cost to administration. But again, I'm speaking as a non-expert, but happy to do some more research if that's helpful.
Thanks so much, Whitney. Actually, just as you were speaking, Sharon was sharing in the chat that you can check out your payroll provider. So Becky, I don't know if you're administering a payroll, but Gusto has some options for HSAs. I know that I've used that company personally. I don't know about administering for your own business, but Ebony also said there's some self-employed insurance options, and they may include the HSA option too. So it looks like we've got some good opportunity here to kind of dig in and find out about some more about this. So really, really awesome questions, and thanks everyone for sharing your expertise in the chat. That's great. We will dig in and find out some more about exactly who can and can't access. And this, again, could be a great opportunity for us to open the door and say, okay, let's get this passed, and then let's improve on this. Let's make it accessible for more people, and let's make it more equitable, like more people can actually get access to this as opposed to those that just work for the right employers. Really awesome questions. Okay, anyone else have a question or a point of clarification you'd like? Really appreciate the thought. I feel like we always learn so much from everybody asking here. So again, this bill, it doesn't have any financial implications for the government, as in like a fiscal anything that you need to know about. Just know that it's pre-tax money that has not, the dollar amount hasn't changed. Did you say 1986, Whitney? Is that right? I mean, and that's kind of shocking, just because we know what we've been hearing just in the last year or so about the increased cost of childcare. And we all know how hard it is to access childcare in many places. So Kelly says, is there a link to access the one-pagers of the proposed bills on our agenda? Yes, thank you so much for asking that, Kelly. So right now, all of the one-pagers are being distributed during each bill training. And then they're available on our Mom Congress members page. So you can access the slides, the one-pagers, which are embedded in those slides, and then the recordings for each training. We will wrap up training on Wednesday or Thursday of this week. Don't quote me, all the days are running together here in our lead up. But once we complete training, we'll put all those one-pagers into a file folder where you can access them too. So it'll be like one-stop shopping once they're all populated there. Oh, you're very welcome. You're so welcome. We'll be sending out quite a few emails here in the next couple of days. You'll be hearing a lot of correspondence from the Mom Congress team. So you'll see things about the bills and where to further access more materials, invitations for your Senate meetings. You'll get reminders about downloading the HUVA. Oh, Ebony promises 1 email a day. I will try to respect that as well, okay? We're excited to advocate for this bill. Please excuse me. So thanks again, Whitney, for your expertise and time. And I will go ahead and stop the recording now.